Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of a Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs.
Hi everybody, so good to be back again.
And welcome everyone to another podcast in giving you a toolkit episode. We bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. And our topic today is the 5 levers for change in the literacy classroom. But before we go on to that, let's talk about the week that was. And I might just start off by talking about today, because I was in the city having a coffee and somebody came over to me and said, "Oh, did you teach year 4 at Scotch College?" And I said, "Yes, many years ago." And she said, "I think you were my teacher." And I said, "Oh, what's your name?" And she said it. And then we worked out, yes, I did teach her, and she was pretty complimentary about that year and what we did, which was fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, film as it.
And so often that it's not very often that you get feedback from many years ago of what you did in your classroom, and sometimes that happens, and it's a bit of a pat on the back, isn't it, Sharon?
Oh, it's wonderful to get that feedback, because as you say, we don't often. Well, we spend that year, if we're full time for that year, spend that year with those students, and it is always so wonderful to see. That's a long time spending with a child, so it's always wonderful to see, what their experiences and what they've gone into, past that year. So
yeah, and you've had people come up to you, Sharon?
I have had, and I always particularly get a bit of a thrill when. Especially in some of the teaching that I've done in the universities, to find that sitting in some of those classes are children who are becoming teachers, who are doing undergraduate studies for teaching and, have been inspired by their teachers. So it's always nice to know that as a teacher in the profession, that we frequently inspire teachers or children to move into the profession as well. And it is a great profession. We love it.
It is. Now, your week that you had this week, Sharon.
Yes, so my week has been really a week of planning for the coming year, because as we record this episode, we're reaching the end of 2020. And so I've had the absolute joy and privilege of planning with all of the projects and schools that I'm going to be working with next year. So one of the big exciting pieces that continues for me next year is the Be Brave and Lead project, where we've been working with principals and literacy leaders in schools in the Adelaide Hills. So running a series of workshops for them this year to enable them to really lead literacy initiatives and change within their own schools. And that group, the 2 groups that I've been working with, the wonderful piece about that is that I can continue working with those people again next year in what we're calling the Be Fearless and Lead project. So wonderful to extend that work into those sites. Plus, we've got 2 new groups for Be Brave and Lead, so 2 whole new groups of leaders and teachers that we'll be working with, as well as continuing with another new group of early career teachers in the Be Brave and Teach project.
So it's really good to have a group of schools involved in this rather than just working with one school. I know you've worked in one school, in separate schools for some time now.
Yes.
But to work in a group of schools together, you're finding that a real catalyst for change?
Well, I think it brings other dimensions to that work. So when schools are, when we're working together as, in that workshop setting, not only are we tailoring the learning to each school as we think about, what they're trying to achieve, but really as those schools are coming together and they're sharing out the initiatives that they're undertaking and the results that they're finding from those initiatives, the impact that they see, all of these layers of that learning, I think really empowers and drives and enhances what people see as the real authentic work happening in schools and how that plays out.
So they can inspire each other across schools rather than just within your school. So you've got more Year 4 teachers, for instance, that can share with each other and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And the principals as well, they're sharing with each other.
Oh, without a doubt, the principal sharing has been extraordinary. I'm always inspired, there's that word again, but inspired by, how leaders and teachers work towards initiating change and how they work with others in their teams to really look closely at what's happening in their school and be very willing to share that. I think these projects in particular have been hugely engaging for all of us because we are learning from each other, as well as, bringing input for each of those sessions. There are real lessons being learned, people trying things out, that's the power of it, is that, coming back to say, well, this is what we've tried out and actually this is what we're seeing already and this is how we got buy-in, or this is how we introduced this. So, we're all working towards bigger things here.
Okay, so you're trying to inspire change. So today we're talking about inspiring change in the classroom, and it can be across a number of classrooms or schools or whatever. But if we're trying to inspire change, I was trying to think of some easy steps that you could take to get change started in literacy. And I guess
what you would call high impact change.
Yeah, change that would really have a big impact and be not too hard to take, and wouldn't be a program, and it wouldn't be something that I had to follow that was a directive. It was something that, I'm developing as a professional.
Yes.
But there are some steps that I can take that can make really big changes because, well, I guess going back to when I first started teaching, that I had, I put my children into literacy groups and I would have them rotating between activities.
And I was doing the exact same thing, Phil.
And a literacy consultant came into my school and said, what the heck are you doing that for? I mean, half your kids are not really doing lots of reading. They're just doing these activities that are not to do with reading. And I went away thinking, oh, my goodness, I thought I was doing a great job, what's going on here?
At what point this was early in your career as a teacher?
Yeah, yeah. And so
same thing happened to me. My second year of teaching, principal, so different school, different principal, asked me the very same question, really asked me to look at what did he think I was, through the rotating activities, how did I think they were growing? How was I growing better readers, more successful readers and writers through this? And it was the first time that I think I was ever asked a really big question as a teacher. I'd questioned myself a lot, but it was really the big question. And it was a hard question because I thought, actually, if I'm not doing this, I'm actually not sure what else I should be doing, which actually prompted me to ask the year sixes in my class, was what I was doing, did they think it was helpful? And was it, if it wasn't going to be that, because that was a resounding no, it wasn't really engaging them and helping them as readers and writers, what would it be? So it was really a journey with the students. I think that was the point where I learned it was really important to listen in to students as readers and writers to find out exactly what they were doing.
Yes, and I wasn't sure what the next step was I had to take. I thought, everyone else around me was doing rotating groups, and each of the groups had a different activity, and, I think I might have even had them at different levels of literacy, but I can't, I'm not too sure.
And you would have been spending a lot of time planning for all of that.
Yeah. And so I guess that person who came in and said, there's a different way to do this, I really want to know. And I guess then after going to conferences and reading research and finding out much more about what is possible, I found that there was another way to look at learning, that it was my view of learning, which was the big thing. It wasn't, and when I started to think about learning and how my kids were learning, I then started to question why I was doing those groups.
Yes.
Does that match with your thinking, Sharon? Or?
Well, it certainly matched the path that I went on, was that, once I was asked that question of why are you doing it this way, it wasn't so much being asked why are you doing it this way as much as what is it enabling your students to achieve as readers and writers.
Okay, yep.
And I could see it was quite narrow what I was enabling them to achieve. So like you, it was very much, that thinking, okay, I need to find out more. And whilst you really learnt more about, the learning theory, and learning pedagogy and how that would impact how and what you would teach. I guess for me, it wasn't so much, it was definitely the learning pedagogy, but what I tapped into, or what really sort of got me thinking deeper, was what we now refer to as the good reader research. Like, what makes a good reader? By looking at what good readers are doing, we can learn more about what it is that we're teaching. And I think I also learned that I didn't necessarily fully understand the reading process. But not only is it the reading process, it is also all of those behaviours and habits and attitudes that good readers have, that I needed to build. It wasn't just about the reading process, it was all the things around that I could learn from. So good reader research told us that good readers, I remember reading this bit and thinking, oh my goodness, that is so true. So what are good readers spending most of their time doing? They're spending the time reading. And when I read about this, in the context of us as adults, to get better at reading, and to enjoy reading, do we spend time doing activities about reading, or do we actually spend the time reading and thinking about it? Which
got me thinking that the rotating groups work that I was doing was a little bit artificial and wasn't real. Was I developing real readers and writers, or was I just doing busy work activities?
Occupying them with, yes.
And then I got really interested in the research that said, yes, the more reading you do, the better you get at reading. The more writing you do, the better you get at writing. And preferably reading and writing that is meaningful to the child, because that will drive their energies to get better, won't it? And, so it sort of put my mind in topsy-turvy land as to, everything I saw around me was that teachers were doing this rotating group activity thing, and then it made me think of, well, what's another way I could teach? And
now, you said something earlier about how these levers, as you've called them, that we'll talk about today, how they're simple and easy pieces. And do you know, in that year, it was very early in the year, my second year of teaching, where the principal asked me that question, and I have to say that I knew that I couldn't just really blunder through another year. I had to do something about that immediately. So I didn't think, do you know, I'll change it next year. I knew that I had to do something right then and there. So I think that's one of the things that, you know, we really want to talk about today, is that there can be a real immediacy to the effect that we can have and the impact that can be brought about by what we think are some pretty simple changes.
And how do we know we're on the right track, Sharon? Is it because, well, I guess we both changed in these new ways and we discovered that our kids were getting more engaged and it was making a real difference in our own classrooms. So that was the first thing that showed us we were on the right track. And then you worked. We
listened to research.
And then when we worked in other schools with other teachers, sometimes on a big city scale like New York City, we saw massive changes by these very simple changes that were happening in the classrooms, didn't we?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. And in these projects, that's exactly what we're seeing, you know, from
the project in the Adelaide Hills.
The Be Brave projects that where, and in fact, one of the early career teachers will share some of that in a podcast coming soon about how, because it's not just making the changes, it's seeing the impact of those changes, and the teachers and leaders that we work with, really that's one of the big sharings that we hear over and over again, is how the impact is seen rapidly.
Yeah. Now, we also recently had Giselle on a podcast, and she was is a teacher in a school where you've worked for many years.
Yes.
And that school has been recognised by ACARA for making
the Australian, for those outside of Australia, the Australian Curriculum Authority,
for having made dramatic changes in exceptional growth in reading.
Yes.
So the actual changes that have happened in that school at Nairn Primary have shown up and been recognised by ACARA.
Yes.
In 2019 for fantastic improvement. So there are real runs on the board to show that the approach is working.
Yes.
So besides us seeing it in our own classrooms.
That's right.
So I guess our question now is how to get this going in a classroom. We probably need to talk about what the 5 levers are.
Yes. Okay, that has been a pretty epic chatty ramble, hasn't it?
That's been an epic start to the podcast, and we're sorry, listeners. You can always fast forward through podcasts, but anyway, here we go with our 5 levers for, with no further ado, and a drum roll, please. We're going to have the 5 levers that we think really are quite simple, but make dramatic changes where you don't have to have that old, well, I call it an older view of learning where, you know, it's just having groupings that are fixed and the kids do activities each day where they rotate around. We came onto this. So the 5 levers, the first one.
And not exclusively 5, would say, but there's 5 that
beginning levers.
Ones that we would start with. You know, these would be the ones, if we said if we were going to change tomorrow, what would we initiate? It would be these.
Number 1 is classroom libraries. Now, we've talked about that on other podcasts, but classroom libraries are relatively simple not that expensive because you can get books fairly cheaply now. You can get them from your
and bring them from your school library, bulk borrow.
And other podcasts talk about how to set those up and how to get really good categories of books in baskets and have all the books facing out towards the children so they can see all the covers really easily, have really fantastic categories that make it a really appealing, attractive. Now, one of the bits of research says that, easy access to books is one of the number one things that, besides children reading a lot, easy access to books that they want to read is one of the biggest things that you can change in your classroom. So that's why we say classroom libraries. Just that is a big change, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And Gallagher talks about, just having a book flood.
Right.
Bringing in because what does that say? If you have a classroom that's full of books, and another person talks about, books should fill every nook and every cranny.
Yep.
That if we say reading is important and we want children to be more successful at reading, then we need to bring them the tools that they need to be able to do that. Yep. So you're absolutely right. Access to books is critical.
Yep.
And when a classroom has got books, as we say, the book flood in there, then, oh my goodness, it's sending that message, isn't it, that this is what we value. We say reading is all about, so being a reader is actually about reading.
Yeah. There was one school I was in where quite a few years ago where a child in year 7, he didn't have any books at home. He didn't have at that stage we hadn't got classroom libraries up and running, but so he didn't have many books in his classroom to look at. And he'd lost access to the school library through his behaviour and whatever. So really he had no access to books at all.
Yeah.
And he was a low-level reader, and, we changed things in that year where we brought in classroom libraries into the school, and immediately, it started to change what was happening.
Yes, yeah.
But it's not just the classroom libraries, it's actually bringing those into your teaching, and that's, other podcasts will talk more about that.
Well, you're going to talk about it right now.
Oh, well, yeah. Number 2, independent reading.
Yes.
Get that going. Now, independent reading is not sustained silent reading after lunch, and it's not a number of things, but it's a different thing, isn't it, Sharon?
Independent reading. So what good readers do, and what, in fact, Allington's research on Allington and Gabriel's research on every child every day says that every child every day should be able to read something they have chosen with accuracy and understanding. That's what independent reading is. So I'm reading something that by reading accurately and with understanding, I am being the reader. I'm orchestrating the behaviours of a reader.
So if we go back a step, that's why we have a very good classroom library that matches that independent reading that we're trying to get going, isn't it?
That's right. Well, the classroom library really needs to represent those in our room.
Yeah.
So we're not just bringing a random collection of anything we can grab.
Yep.
We are mindfully thinking about, all right, what am I wanting to give those students that are here with me access to? And
I think Giselle talked about that really well, how she tries to match the books to her students.
Yeah. So, this was my biggest learning right at the beginning, was actually I have to listen to and be aware of my readers as readers and my writers as writers. So what are their interests? So what kinds of books will I bring in? What have they not read? What have they, what kinds of books have they never been exposed to? What do I bring in? In fact, the Australian curriculum, it is so, in fact, all countries' curriculums probably do this same thing, but in the Australian curriculum, it's always. Actually, I think this was one of my tools that I was going to suggest people go back to, but seriously, go back into the Australian curriculum and look at what it says, F to 10, the range and the kinds of texts we should be bringing to our students every year. So that full range of things, you know, from traditional stories through to historical fiction, through to information texts of all kinds, through to poetry, through to stories of Asia, through to realistic fiction, through to books that write. There's
so
that
we've
richness that we really
So we've got our classroom library and we've got it matching our children. So say we have.
yes
Now,
yes, good. Bring us back to.
but there is a problem. There has been a problem with a bit of confusion between silent reading and independent reading, hasn't there?
Yes.
And I don't think some people have got what the difference is. There is a huge difference, isn't there?
Yes.
It's a huge difference. It's not sustained silent reading or just silent reading or just reading. Independent reading is a specific, very specific activity, isn't it? Or not activity, or process, or...
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
Do you want to go on a...
Well, no, so that is that it should be that it's books that children have chosen and that they're reading them accurately and with understanding.
Yeah.
So we want them
But
to be successful with those books, because we don't want them, if we say that independent or sustained silent reading time is the things that we are seeing where a child picks up a different book each day, or they don't have a book, or they're just flicking through that book,
or as I've seen
they
one,
can't understand it.
or they've got a book they're holding upside down where they're pretending to read, but they're not really reading, or they've got it up the right way and they're still not really reading.
Yeah.
So that brings in the question of the other aspect of independent reading, which is really important, and it comes up with number 3 now, is conferring, because it's really about monitoring with those children very closely what they are reading.
And what they're doing as readers.
And what they're doing as readers.
Yeah. So we're wanting, our conferring should absolutely be helping us find out where the children are. Look, for a start, choosing books, maybe if we just go back one step to that at the moment, choosing books, that's why our classroom libraries need to be arranged in ways to allow multiple ways to access the books in there. Many of our children think that you choose a book by the level. And if they're choosing by level, then we're limiting them to knowing all the ways that books can be sorted and categorised and accessed.
Yes, because I remember one child said to me once, I said to him, how do you know you're a good reader? And he said, because I'm on level 19. And that's the only indication of what a good reader meant.
Yes. Or we ask students, what are you reading at the moment? And they'll tell us the level. That lets us know that we're not building reading as a process that the child is actually in charge of. When they say they're reading, what they're reading at the moment is a level of a book, then they're not aware of what all the good things, how do you know you're a good reader? What I'm reading at the moment, I'm reading this and I'm getting all of this knowledge and making discoveries, and I'm so into this author, and this is a fantasy story and I haven't read fantasy before, or these are the kinds of things that we want readers as in the children being readers, this is the kind of talk we want them. This is what lets us know they're engaged, that they are in charge of. That's why choice is important, and why reading with accuracy and understanding is they're in charge of that.
Yep.
They're the one doing the doing. And the conferring should really enable us to find out how they're going with all of those things and being able to direct them into new strategies, new goals that they have as readers. But we're helping build that picture of what it is to be an independent reader, not just I'm quiet for 20 minutes after lunch kind of reader. That's not what we're working towards.
So, going back a step, the big change that's happening here is that all of the children are independently reading at the same time, and they're not going into their fixed groups.
That's right.
The koalas, the kangaroos, and the wombats. They are going into their own reading with their own book, and they're all doing it together as a group, which is one of our timeless C's together.
Yes.
So that's a big change, a view of learning, isn't it?
It is a big change, because we're saying that if we're saying that being able to, that time spent reading and that choice and accuracy and understanding is important, that is an everyday piece. That isn't I get to do that just on the day when in my rotating groups I get to maybe once a week.
So we're getting real reading opportunities every day on books that I really want to read.
Yes, and that I can read and that help me grow.
But it's guaranteed reading time. It's monitored by the teacher closely. It's not sustained silent reading. Yeah. It is the children finding out about what a good reader does.
Yes.
So independent reading is a whole lot more than silent reading.
Yes, yes. And I think we've talked about this in another podcast too, that whilst we might say, but we need them in groups because they're at different levels as a reader.
Yep.
It's the book itself. If I'm reading the book that is just right for me, then I'm working with the book that I need to grow as a reader.
Yeah.
So the teacher doesn't need to be deciding which book is right for me. No. Number one, I want to be able to learn how to choose the books that are right for me and get on with that business of reading so that I can be practicing. So that's why we can say I can have 30 children in my class. They can all be reading the book that is right for them during that independent reading time. So everybody's reading, and reading is being differentiated for everybody because they're reading the book that is right for them.
And a teacher might say, when I have my groups, I get to see my children in their group, a different group each day. So I'm very close up with those children and I can see what they're doing.
Yes.
When I have them all reading a book out there in my classroom, how do I catch up with them? What's the way of catching up with them? Well, we've got a way of doing that too, haven't we? Which is conferring.
That's right.
Which could be just going with one individual child at a time, or it could be getting a group together. But you keep track of what groups you are or children you are monitoring, and just as you just don't have a fixed rotating group system.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
And we're not saying group work isn't important.
No.
We're not saying that there are times where we will want to bring together a group of students because we can see that they have a particular, if it's, say, for reading, a reading strategy.
But the grouping is much more responsive to the needs of the children in what they're doing in the class.
Yes. In fact, your number 4 one on the list, the mini lesson.
Yep.
If I've there's 2 ways for me to really learn more about where students are in their reading and writing, and that is watching during the mini lesson how students are engaging with me during that time. Am I seeing that, they're ready for that independent practice? Or do you know what? I can see that this child here, this one over here, that one over there, I'm going to hold them whilst everyone goes back for their independent practice. So now we're talking about, if it's independent reading or writing, that we are wrapping that independent practice time with some teaching. So it's being wrapped with a mini lesson beforehand.
To the whole group? Or?
To the whole group, which is unlike silent sustained reading, where it's just everybody
just
gets
go
out
reading.
there, go read. And we're not saying that free choice reading time isn't something we wouldn't do either, but we're talking about independent reading time being wrapped with some teaching.
So it's actually more of an instructional time, the independent reading. Even though they're having a free choice of their text, it's much more instructional. It's much more purposeful.
Yes.
We are teaching and focused. We are teaching. So we could say it's really systematic teaching. It is teaching what the Australian curriculum is asking us to teach.
Yes.
And we're being very, very focused on what we're doing.
Based on what we see are the needs of our students.
And and that independent reading is allowing them the time to practice those skills that you're teaching in the mini lesson in that independent time. That, to me, that was the big light bulb moment for me in changing from that old way of teaching to this new way. It really made me think, wow, this is what it's about. This is, I mean, yes, we can get better at whatever in our teaching, but that was a really big change for me, for that piece.
Yes, and that there was that authentic immediacy to what I had demonstrated in a mini lesson could then be practiced immediately. If it was a reading mini lesson, I could practice it immediately for myself as a reader. And as a teacher, I could watch that happening.
Yep.
I could catch that. I could sit with a child or rove to see how that was being applied.
Yep.
So application of these things, that is probably the word that was my real struggle in the rotating groups, was to actually see how what I was teaching, and I don't think I was as explicit in my teaching, because in this way I'm teaching to the whole group. There is such power in that. Teaching to the whole class the strategies the good reader strategies.
Yep.
And so when that then gets taken straight into, they can practice that straight away, that was just getting such great traction that I had never got before.
No. And in those mini lessons, there are two really powerful tools that we use that we discovered through watching other teachers and conferences, whatever. One was the read aloud and the other was shared book experience. Those really two powerful literacy tools that
for reading and writing
that are still winners today.
Yes.
And we're seeing them work powerfully now in the schools we're in now.
Yes.
And, other podcasts will go through those things in more depth. But read aloud and shared book experience, which is
essential
in those mini lessons.
Yes.
Yep.
Because we need to be able to demonstrate what good readers and writers are doing through the text that we're using.
Simple as that, isn't it?
Simple as that.
And those two tools allow that to happen. And if it's done especially by the teacher, it's much more powerful than using something else.
Yes.
So I think so far we've got number 1, classroom libraries, number 2, independent reading, number 3, conferring, number 4, mini lessons as our 4 levers for change.
Yes.
Now our 5th lever would be, I think, connecting reading with writing and word work, of course, but making really powerful connections between those is probably the fifth one.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Because once again, that connection, we need to remember all the time, reading is in service to writing, writing is in service to reading, and, spelling, word work is in service to both of those. So once we can, if we think about, and the strategies that we need for reading, we think of those same strategies when we are writing. When we are creating text,
Yep.
we are having to think about the very same things that we're doing as we read. When we are reading, we can read like writers do.
And the thing that crosses over those two things that glues them together is meaning, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Oh, gosh, I can't believe we've gone this whole time and not even mentioned that.
The word meaning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it's all about meaning making, meaningfulness of these and the authenticity of this, of making meaning through the authentic process. We make meaning as we're reading, we make meaning as we're writing, and that's the foundational piece to both of them.
Yep. Because in that meaning we get the kids' understanding and engagement like nothing else.
Yes.
No program can do that for us. So
No.
getting meaning going, and by connecting reading and writing, that's what we're doing.
Yes.
We're focusing on the meaning.
Yes.
So I think another podcast at another time to talk more about connecting reading and writing. But, I think today was more about just saying that there are five really simple levers for change. Starting levers, the start.
Starting, yes, yeah. And whilst I feel like we've kind of probably been a bit messy today, sort of going all over the place with things, I think this starting to think, to really be challenged to think, yes, in what ways can I really enable my readers and writers to grow, that I think it does feel a bit messy to think, how do I get all of that happening? Because one of the other things that we might say is, how do I find enough time in the day to make all of that happen? So we're not answering all of that. We'll be talking about this until the cows come home, really, because these are fundamental pieces that we, really believe make the high impact difference that allow readers and writers to be, just that, as successful as they can. As we say, real entry points. Each of these give readers and writers real entry points into the real work of reading and writing.
And I guess we could have probably said not just independent reading, we could have said independent writing as well, because daily time to write is just as important as daily time to read. Yeah.
Yes. I know. Phil, we kind of missed that whole...
Yeah, but we've just kind of added that in now, and that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just as we'd be conferring with readers or...
Writers.
And writers.
And we really haven't gone into word work at all, but we just wanted to give 5 starting levers, really, just to get things going.
Because actually the word work flows so connectedly when we are engaging our students with, because when we remember that word work is in service to reading and writing, that's why it exists. The more we have our students reading and writing, the more powerful their understanding and strategies for learning about words increases.
And we talked about that with Giselle too on spelling and vocabulary.
That's right.
Well, today we've had a really good session, and we've looked at simple but powerful ways of changing in the classroom, and it could be done just in your classroom or across your school. I think, when I first started, it was just me in my classroom, and wasn't other teachers until I met other teachers at conferences and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a really good point, Phil, is that it's not dependent on, bigger picture to make that change. It can happen right at a classroom level.
Because I think you were in a school where they said you had to follow this program, and you said to them, well,
there was only one aspect of that in this school where a program was required, and that actually happened to be a grammar booklet or book.
Yeah.
And it was a textbook. So it was a very glossy paged, expensive textbook.
That every child had?
That the school had kind of made the commitment that we would buy that for every child in the middle and upper years of the school. And I put forward to the school, I said, all right, how much will all of those books cost? How much will that, for every child? So it was a class set of books that would be purchased.
Yep.
And it was a lot of money.
Yep.
And I said, oh, okay. If I promise to teach everything that's in that grammar book in the same order that everybody else is doing it, so it was a week-by-week piece that we were asked to be doing. If I do that in the same order, can I have, instead of having the grammar books, can I have that money for the purchase of books in the classroom library?
And did they say yes?
And they said yes. And that just gave us a huge, really plumped up our library collection. And all the grammar work that I did, we taught that through the texts that we were reading. So they were looking for examples of, so any, grammar aspect that we were taking, we linked it to our reading and our writing, because remember that that's all in service to our reading and our writing. So we did all of that work, and I am going to say that at the end of that year, when at that time there was it wasn't national testing at that time, but we had some school-based tests that we did. The grammar results that we were testing and the spelling results that we were testing were just absolutely outstanding in my class, and I was one of 3 classes at a year level. So, we can think about how is it possible to teach these things, and how can they be connected in ways that link and stem from this authentic reading and writing, lots of that practice that they're doing with it, and seeing how it exists. So, no, it didn't need a program.
No. And I must say, it's all about getting kids excited in their reading and writing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
the richness of it.
That's the big thing, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think also we can say that teachers might like to start off the new year trying something new. Mm-hmm. This might be those 5 levers might be a way of starting off the next year. And gee, folks, it's going to be a great year next year for all of us. We had in lots of ways, we've had a tough year in 2020.
But exceptional work still being done. Yes.
Especially those teachers have had to do the online work in a heavy way. But I think next year, let's have a great year, folks, and let's try some new things.
Yeah.
Try the 5 levers for change. Now, Sharon, let's go to our key questions. We've had question 1 at the start, looking at what you've been doing this week. But question 2, or key question 2, what's a good tool that you've been using in the classroom with teachers?
All right, so one of the things that I've already mentioned is if you're thinking about setting up a classroom library, and you want to think about, how can I categorise and sort the books that we're working with? How can I really, bring those to my students in ways where they can look at books and access them in different ways. The Australian curriculum, as I said, is a really good place to go back and look at what kinds of texts are we actually wanting our students to engage with? Not only engage with as readers, but to create those kinds of texts. So if we're thinking about what kinds of texts, so what kinds of imaginative texts, what categories can I have of imaginative texts? What categories can I have of informational texts? How can I link those with curriculum areas? So looking at the Australian curriculum is really a great tool for thinking about the range of texts at any year level that I would bring into my classroom library. For those of you that are members of our Teachific website, I've just putting up 3 packs, one for Foundation Year 1, one for Year 2 and 3, then 4, 5, 6, of categories and labels for baskets or collections.
That really expand your thoughts on
really expands it, because it's not just about the categories the Australian curriculum thinks about. It goes even further than that, even thinking about how do we extend that into the class-made books that we're making, how do we engage students in those sorts of types of books. And we don't have to have all of those books in at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
It's about a classroom library is a breathing, growing piece across a year. So the categories that I have, they'll come up at different times. So I go, I haven't got a category for that, but there's a way to categorise books.
So we're going to have those resources up on the Teachific website very soon. We give out a weekly MailChimp newsletter, and as soon as those resources are up, that'll come out through the newsletter. But on that newsletter, by the way, we have details of our blogs and podcasts. So start subscribing if you're not on that newsletter, and you'll get the latest details of what's going on. So that's key question 2. Now, key question 3, what's a tantalising text that you've been using in the classroom, Sharon?
Okay, well, actually, I'm going to take this opportunity because I've just mentioned and talked about categories of texts that we can have in our library. So this week I've actually brought a category, and these are some texts that I've been recommending in classrooms that I've been working with, because a number of classrooms, particularly for middle and upper primary classrooms, students have been engaged in writing historical fiction. And there's been, for some students, this is why I've suggested they have some historical fiction novels in their classrooms, because it's going to help them understand how the historical fiction works. So if you're ever getting students to write historical fiction, here are some good examples of those.
And I suppose you're saying not just have them in the classroom, but the teacher can use them for read aloud.
For read alouds, yes. Really good point, Phil, that not only are they good because we can read them to learn more about how that text type works, but having it as a read aloud lets us do that talk together.
Becomes a teaching tool.
It becomes the teaching tool. So my mini lessons, some of those can focus on how does historical fiction work.
Yep.
Historical fiction, because it's based on, so we've got fictional characters in historical fiction, but it's always based on an event or a time period that did happen. So it's not fantasy, it's historical fiction. So that's the history part of it. So, of course, with these, we can often make some really good links to different aspects of our curriculum if we can match it with a fictional story of that time period or of that event. So, as examples of those, so I've got from the My Australian Story series published by Scholastic, all of theirs in the series are diaries. So that's always a nice additional piece to add to it is that historical fiction isn't just narrative only. It can be in diary form. But I've got here the one called Cyclone Tracy, the diary of Ryan Turner. So here we've got that significant event in Darwin's history, Cyclone Tracy. So not only can we learn about how a historical fiction works through that diary format, we can learn about that as an event.
The actual
in
history
Australia.
we learn about.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. And also linking it to, I can link that to my science curriculum through weather, through, I can bring these books in multiple ways, link them in, it doesn't just have to be, but I am focusing on this as a genre today. And I could well have, in my middle and upper primary classrooms, I would always want to have a basket of or a collection of historical fiction that's available. Another one in the My Australian Story series is called Who Am I? The Diary of Mary Talents. And this is about a young Aboriginal child who has been stolen and arrives at the Bomaderry Aboriginal Children's Home when she was 5 years old. So a fictional character, but it is the story of that time period and what, in this instance, the Aboriginal Children's Home in Western Australia.
So events that really did happen. Yep.
And because the stories are written with child characters that would be the age of students that we're working with, it's very relatable. It's a great way for students to be able to understand that historical event.
Yep.
Yeah. Margie McAllister, sorry, I didn't even mention the authors of the books, the previous ones I've mentioned, but Margie McAllister has written a book called Archie's War. In this book, it's about World War I, and it's about the story of the Master Ted is the one that goes off to war, and his dog is left behind, his dog Star, and the child protagonist in this story has to look after the dog. But it's set within the context of World War I. Black Powder by Ali Sherrick. This is a rollicking tale. It's a great, rip-roaring adventure, but historical fiction about Guy Fawkes.
Oh, so that's a fascinating story.
Oh, So how did Guy Fawkes, who was Guy Fawkes, how did what we know as Guy Fawkes, is no longer. We grew up with Guy Fawkes Night, of course, because we're old enough to be in that time period where we could have firecracker nights. And but there is once again the how the historical fiction works.
English history, actually.
English history.
Yeah.
So the story set in 1605.
And he came very close to doing what he wanted to do, which was to blow up Parliament.
Yes. But terrific story. It's a really great read. And the last one that I've brought just as a sample collection, another historical fiction, is called A Night Divided by Jennifer A. Nielsen. And this is a story set as the Berlin Wall goes up. So it's A Night Divided.
Oh, that's when it actually went up?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So this story begins as that wall is going up, the Berlin Wall is going up, and the effect that has on the children.
I was going to say, told by the children? Or
it is told from the children's perspective.
Yep.
So 12-year-old Goethe and her family are actually divided overnight. So it's not even Goethe and her family and another family, it's the impact it has on just her family.
So
really...
As you've been talking there, it just reminded me of the Diary of Anne Frank. Same sort of thing, and actually visiting her house and how they hid away and was so sad.
Yeah.
So real.
Yes.
Yep.
But of course, that's an example of that is her diary.
Yep.
So not fictional, whereas the ones I've given an example of today are all fictional characters.
Good.
So
good to see the difference there.
Historical event or time period. So with the war, that was a time period, World War I.
Yep.
Historical event or time period, but in each of these instances, well, in historical fiction, it's fictional characters within that. Now, there's lots of really tremendous historical fiction to go searching for.
Yep.
And it is, I can't recommend it enough, actually, as a way to bring many of those things, many events in history alive for children.
Yep.
Because they can read it through a child's eyes.
Yep. And I guess this is an area that, upper primary, middle to upper primary, even secondary schools.
Oh, most definitely.
Could be looking at this sort of work.
Yes,
So
yes.
I know we had an inquiry about secondary schools. So I think that kind of wraps us up for this week. And thank you, everyone, for joining us again.
And I did want to just mention to thank all the people who have been emailing us, sending us questions or and who have been tuning in. We are thrilled with the number of people who are joining us each week on our podcasts. And so we hope that we are continuing to bring really useful and relevant and authentic ideas, tips.
Yeah, we hope
tools.
We hope this week the 5 levers gives you a starting point for changing.
Yeah.
And we hope if you'd like to write in, just go to the Q Learning website and just go to contact us and write to us. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just going to end our little fun ending today by saying the word teacher in another language, and I'm going to say it in French, professeur. And you say it the same way for masculine and feminine, but it's spelt slightly differently.
Ah, interesting and good to know.
Interesting.
And, of course, all of these words, it's hard not to then make links, is it, into word work and vocabulary, where we go, so what's the root of, because French, as we know, has the Latin root, so... Have we got what?
Well, let's leave that to the listeners and our own research, and we'll come back to you on that one. Thank you for throwing that one in, Sharon. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you next time. Thank you. All right.
Have a wonderful week, everyone.
Yep. See you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.